Alrighty, here we go. Communication and radar services. So make sure you have your packet on communication and radar services, ready to take these notes and get them written down there. Anything that's not in this video, we'll just add to the notes. So we may add some things in class, so we'll just add pages to there as we need to. But this will get us through the bulk of the notes for this lesson. There's a lot to know in here, a lot of vocabulary, because one of the way things pilots are known for is how they talk, like how they talk on the radio, and they hear certain things and they anticipate certain things and they respond a certain way and they sound a certain way, and you got to know how all this stuff works together. So there's a lot of vocabulary and a lot to be known about this stuff. So it's definitely a good standalone kind of lesson after you've learned some other things about airports and maybe airspace and things like that. So let's unravel the mystery of communication and radar services. So here we go. So professional pilots know how to communicate clearly, as many times we're talking to someone over the radio far away. So it's not like talking face to face. It's not like texting where they can read what you wrote or anything like that. It's usually you're talking to someone who can't necessarily visualize what you are and what you're doing. So you have to be able to communicate what you're doing so they can kind of have an image or some sort of idea in their head of what you're doing, and you can understand them so you can help figure out what they're doing, because you may be separating yourselves, or you may be talking to a radar facility on the ground or something like that. So the first thing is general aviation communication uses a portion of the VHF range, including frequencies between 11.800 megahertz and 135.975 megahertz. They just want you to know that. What does that mean? That means that when we go to dial in frequencies on our radios, it's going to be the lowest value will be this, and the highest value will be that. There you go. Military aircraft use, I think, some UHF frequencies, so they're on a different band a lot of times. So we're talking about VFR aircraft here that are civilian aircraft, general aviation type aircraft. So yeah, so who are we communicating with exactly? Well, we might be communicating with other aircraft, flight service stations. We'll talk about what those are. Receiving weather broadcasts, control towers, our crew members, air traffic control, things like that. So here's some basic, some things we might be using to talk. So this is like a handheld radio up here in the picture. So one of CTAF. CTAF is the Common Traffic Advisory Frequency. This is the open channel that pilots use to communicate with. Then we have something called a flight service station. Oh, sorry. Yeah, here's an image. So when you see this little C after a frequency on a sectional chart, that's the CTAF. So I would dial in that frequency on my radio, and I would have my headset on, and I'd be talking to them. And for this airport, so for Currituck County here, we would dial in 1229.9er, and I'd be talking to the aircraft coming and going from this uncontrolled field. And we know it's uncontrolled because it's not blue. Now this one down here, Elizabeth City, that one is blue, so it does have a control tower, so it says CT 120.5, but then it also has the CTAF after it. That's because that control tower is part-time, and so therefore when they close, the control tower frequency becomes the CTAF frequency. Here's one up here, 22.7, and here's another one that's 22.8. Now, why would they have different frequencies? Well, they're close together, and we don't want twin counties all their radio chatter over here at Mountain Empire. We want to have our own frequency, so they separate them by one number there. Another one we might be talking to is a flight service station. A flight service station. This is an office that's located at an airport and where information can be obtained. Now, flight service stations aren't exactly gone. They just aren't used as much as they used to. Pre-internet, prehistoric times, maybe for some of you, we couldn't just go online and look up a bunch of information in a matter of seconds. We needed to have an expert. We wanted to have an expert we could talk to. So we would pick up a phone and we would dial a number. We could dial 1-800 and then using the letters on the keypad, WX, which is weather, and then the word brief. And we could call them up and talk to a flight service station and talk to them. And they're not everywhere. The closest one in Utah is in Cedar City, so that's where the flight service is. But they were regional, and they would help you file flight plans. They'd give you weather information. They could give you NOTAM information. They were just kind of like your kind of like a source of information that was very, very heavily used 20 years ago. And now we just don't use it quite as much. Then we have a Unicom. A Unicom is for aircraft to get information from someone working on an airfield, like information about fuel, maintenance, and parking. And so some airfields will have a Unicom. So you can also say like, let's say like Tooele Valley had a Unicom, and we could say like Tooele Valley Unicom. A Cessna 470 Echo Sierra, I'm 40 miles out. What's your price of fuel down there? And they could tell you that. So you could decide, kind of shop around the fuel a little bit or whatever information you wanted to know about it. Another thing we might use the radio for, we won't talk to these people, but we can get a recorded message called ATIS. ATIS stands for Automated Terminal Information System, and it's a recording that updates regularly with the airport information, including weather, NOTAMs, and safety information. This is a little fact I learned. If no cloud or visibility is on an ATIS, then the ceiling is greater than 5,000 feet and the visibility is greater than 5 miles or more. That's just one I like to throw in there because sometimes we need to know a little bit about the ATIS. We'll learn more about weather information later on. Then we have a control tower. Oh, sorry, I just put this here. You can barely see it, but right up here is the ATIS frequency right there. It says ATIS 118.25. So there's ATIS at this field, but there's not ATIS down here at Johnson City. There's no ATIS at Elizabethton Municipal. And then, of course, there's the control tower. If there is a tower, you must request permission prior to moving on aircraft taxiways or runways. Now, that's not totally true. We're going to talk more about that later on when we get to services. But here's a control tower frequency, 119.1. And it is also the CTAF when the tower closes at night. All right, here's how we use it. Facility at the airport. If there's a Unicom and no tower, we would use 22.7, 22.8, 22.725, 22.975, and 23.0. Now, outbound, you're going to use it before you're taxiing, and inbound, you're going to use it 10 miles out and while entering the pattern or while being in the pattern. You would use it like a CTAF. Now, if there's no tower, Unicom, or flight service, you want to self-announce on a multicom, which is typically 22.8 before taxiing, 10 miles out while entering the pattern or while being in the pattern. You're starting to see a pattern there on those, I think. Now, let's say there's no tower in operation, but there is a flight service station open on the field. You could communicate with the flight service station on the CTAF. And, yep, before taxiing, you should call them and let them know. And when you're inbound, 10 miles out while in or entering the pattern. What about a flight service station is closed and there's no tower at the airfield? So you're flying into Cedar City at night and the flight service station is closed. Self-announce on the CTAF before taxiing 10 miles out while in the pattern or entering the pattern. All right, let's talk about phraseology. This is one of the favorite things that my students like to learn about because they want to sound like a pilot. You want to sound like a pilot. So let's learn about phraseology. Here we go. There's the phonetic alphabet. We'll talk about this in class a little bit, but we're going to want to memorize this. So we talk about Alpha, Bravo, Charlie, Delta, Echo, Foxtrot, Golf, Hotel, India, Juliet, Kilo, Lima, Mike. And, of course, November, Oscar, Papa, Quebec, Romeo, Sierra, Tango, Uniform, Victor, Whiskey, X-Ray, Yankee, Zulu. We'll talk about that, though, in class. Altitudes and numbers. We do have a certain way we like to say numbers because we want to make sure we're very clear on numbers. And you want to speak each number for the thousands place value. And you want to speak the hundreds with single number followed by hundreds. So 11,500 would be 1,500. I don't know why I put that there. Remember, 9 is niner, 5 is fife for numbers, and 3 is tree. No, I don't really know why. I know that they changed 9 and 5 because they kind of sound the same on the radio. 3, not sure what that sounded like, but they changed it to tree. It's kind of fun to say. So we'll practice some of those in class, but like this one would be 1,2,500 or 4,300. Next thing we're talking about is light gun signals. So imagine that you're landing at a field with a control tower and your radio fails. What should you do? Well, down here in this little picture, and you might be able to see it better in class, there you can see they'll have this thing that's a light gun. And if it's steady green and you're on the ground, you're cleared for takeoff. If it's steady green and you're in there, you're cleared to land. So your Flashing green, clear for taxi on the ground. Steady red, stop on the ground. Flashing red, taxi clear of the runway in use. Flashing white, return to the starting point on the airport, so taxi back to where you are. And if you're on the ground and it's alternating green or red, use extreme caution. Now, if you're in the air and it's steady green, clear to land, flashing green means return for landing. So you just took off and they see a flashing green one, they mean for you to return to landing. Steady red, give way to other aircraft or keep circling. They're going to bring you in when they get a chance. In the air, flashing red, airport unsafe, do not land. So I put this in your notes for you, but you definitely want to memorize those. There's some good test questions, I imagine, on those. I did get to see the light gun. I used to take students up to Ogden Tower, and they get to see it in person. And then when we're flying, sometimes if there's nobody in pattern, I say, hey, can you give us light gun signals for the next couple of radio calls so that my students could see it? It is brighter than you think. You can definitely see it. It's not like a little flashlight or a laser pointer or anything. So now we've talked about radios. Let's talk about a little bit about ATC. That's Air Traffic Control Services. And we want to learn a little bit about kind of what these services are. What can they do for us, right? What can they do for us? Well, let's start with a little bit about these. These are some main people you might talk to in the air or at a busier airport like a Class B or Class C or maybe even Class D airport. And so let's start with this thing called clearance delivery. Now, if you're at a really busy airport, they don't want you calling up and getting clearance to take off and taxi and everything else. They want to get you in the system. So this is sort of like checking in at the hotel kind of. And so you call clearance delivery, and they coordinate with other ATC facilities and provide departing aircraft with an instrument flight clearance if they need to. So, for example, you might call up Salt Lake Clearance. You say, Salt Lake Clearance, Skyhawk 470 Echo Sierra, VFR to Evanston, Wyoming with information kilo. And the information is the ATIS. So you'd say, I have ATIS kilo, or you could say information kilo. And then they might come back and they might say something like, Cessna 470 Echo Sierra, you're cleared out of Class Bravo airspace. Climb and maintain 5,500 feet. Departure frequency would be 120.9 or squawk 4381 or 0421 or whatever their squawk codes they give out. And so then you would read that back. Okay, and then now you're in the system. You have a squawk code you put in your transponder. We haven't talked about transponders yet, but that's where you get all that stuff from. Okay, and you call them up before you taxi or even before you start the engine if you want to. Now, ground control, that's controls taxiing and movement on the ground. That's what they do. So before you taxi, you might call up ground control and say, Skyhawk 470 Echo Sierra, ready to taxi to runway. Ready to taxi, and you tell them where you're at because it might be a big airport and they don't know where to look for you on the ground. They're maybe up there with binoculars looking around or something like that. And so you want to call them, tell you where they are, and they'll give you a taxi clearance. And you just call them when you're ready to taxi. Now, tower, they basically sequence, departing and arriving traffic. That's their purpose, okay? So they kind of control the runway environment. So they want to know who's coming in to land and who's taking off, and they control the sequencing of that, who goes first, second, third, or whatever. So you would call them while you're holding shore of the runway. Don't call them on the runway. Or if you need to just cross the runway to get to the other side, you want to call them because they're going to sequence you across that runway. And so you might call them up and request takeoff. So you might say, Salt Lake Tower, Skyhawk 470 Echo Sierra, ready for departure, runway 35. And they'll tell you one of many things. We'll talk about that in class. But you call them when you're ready to take off. Departure control. Controls traffic departing a busy area. Controls traffic departing a busy area. So what does that mean? You want to call them when instructed by the tower. So let's look at something here. So departure control is kind of once you're airborne, you might be told to contact departure. So let's take a look here. Get myself out of the way here. Alrighty. So I just took off out of Salt Lake International here. And now I'm airborne and I'm flying out. I'm over here climbing over the city here, and I'm going to turn and head westbound over the lake here. So once I'm getting away from the runway environment a little bit, the tower's kind of done with me. So they may say contact departure. So I would contact departure control. And remember in our clearance, they may have given me a frequency like 120.9 or something like that. So I would contact 120.9. And at that point, you just check in. You just say Salt Lake departure, Skyhawk 470 Echo Sierra, 5,500, which is my altitude. You can just report it in. That's say, roger that, Skyhawk 470 Echo Sierra, or they may give me some further instructions and they may say, fly the transition, and I'll fly like a transition out here or something like that. Let's see if I can zoom in and see a transition. Here we go, Salt Lake City TAC. Here we go. So see these purple arrows? These are transitions. So I might fly this transition. This is called the I-80 transition. So I might fly this transition out here. It basically follows I-80. So that's who departure is. They're just trying to get me out of this bigger airspace here. See all this airspace? They're trying to get me out of here. Once I get out here, I can just be totally done with Salt Lake approach or departure. But I maybe I'm flying out to Wendover. I'm going west. Maybe I'm going to California or something like that. So at that point, I'm going to call up maybe a center, and I want somebody to watch me while I fly out there. We call this flight following. And so we're going to have them follow us to where we're going, and they're just going to watch us on radar. And so you might call up what's called a TRACON or a center, we call them. And so we're going to say, I'll come back to approach control in just a minute, but you call them en route when you're away from the terminal area, and you can get traffic alerts from them, flight following from them. They can also help you stay out of airspace and stuff like that too. Now I'm coming back into Salt Lake or a busy airport. I might call up an approach controller. Not every airport has an approach controller. Only the bigger ones do. The ones who need to manage and sequence the arriving traffic to get them set up to be in the airspace, to be set up to land, or maybe they're just transitioning the area. So let's take, for example, that we are coming into land at Salt Lake International. I'm going to zoom in here, and we're coming once again from the west. So we're flying in kind of like this jet is over here on this side of the screen, and we're flying in, and I would want to call them before I got to this airspace. And Class B airspace starts right here at 6,500 feet and goes to 12,000. Maybe I'm cruising in here at 7,500 feet. So I'm underneath this shelf, which stops at 8.6, and I'm cruising in here to this one here, and I want to call them before I cross this line because I need clearance. So I might call up approach control. So I get on approach control frequency. I could look it up in the airport facility, the chart supplement, or whatever your source of information is, and you would say Salt Lake approach, Skyhawk 470 Echo Sierra, 7,500 feet. I'm currently, from some landmark like the Garfield Stacks here. I could even say, I'm 15 miles to the west of the airfield, landing Salt Lake International, and I want to tell them the ATIS. So I'd say like ATIS kilo or something like that. And they'd say, roger that, 470 Echo Sierra, squawk 0431 or something like that. And so I put in my squawk code into my transponder, which we are going to learn about in this lesson. And then they'd come back once they get me on radar, and they say, 470 Echo Sierra, you're cleared into Class Bravo airspace, the magic words that you want to hear. They'll say, descend and maintain 6,500, follow the I-80 transition, or they might say follow the barn transition, which is up here. That's what these arrows are. And the only reason I know that is because you could zoom in and read this map if you wanted to, but that's where you do. You just study the maps, or you fly in and out of the same airspace all the time. So then I'm cleared into there. And then approach control is going to stay with me till I get near the runways, and I'm going to try to come into land. Who am I going to call to get my clearance to land? Well, I'm going to call tower again. That's because they control this arriving traffic once again. And then we just kind of do the whole thing in reverse. We'll call tower, they'll get us in, we'll land, then we'll call ground control, and then we'll go and park. We don't call clearance delivery again, though. Okay, this next thing is terminal radar programs, and there's two kinds of radar that we're going to talk about. The first one is basic radar service. This is Class B and C, and they give you safety alerts, traffic advisories, limited vectoring. Vectoring means they'll tell you kind of where to go. They'll tell you where to go, and on a workload permitting basis. Okay, that's what you should expect to get if you're flying in and out of Class B or Class C airspace. Now, there's something called a TRSA, Terminal Radar Service Area. I've actually never participated in a TRSA. There's still some left in the United States, but participation is voluntary. You could fly right through a TRSA. It's on a map. It'll say TRSA. You can fly right in there and not talk to anybody if you don't want to. But if you do participate, they will give you sequencing and separation, takeoff and land. They'll give you traffic information and all those kinds of things. So they are super helpful. I'm not afraid to talk to ATC in any way. So anytime there's a radar service available, I'm typically going to use it. Man, I like people helping keep me out of trouble. I really do. Some people are afraid. They think they're watching you and you're gonna get in trouble working with them. I've not had that experience personally. So, yeah. let's keep going. All right, so how do they know where I am? I keep talking about radars, and I mentioned transponders many times in this class. Let's talk about what a transponder actually is. So a transponder, I wish I had a picture of one here. Let's see here. Transponder. Let's see if we can find one here. So we'll find this picture of one here. And the old ones look like this. You literally can put in 4 digits here. This looks to be a mode C transponder, I believe, and I'll explain what that means in just a minute. But basically, you type in a code here, and you then when they sweep you, they'll give you an individual code for that area. So yours might be 3681 or whatever, and you dial in 3681, and then they know when they sweep it, they're like, oh, that's Skyhawk 470 Echo Sierra or whatever it is. And so that's the ones that we use for that. That way they know who we are. They get information from us and give us a squawk code. They call it squawking when you put a number in there, like squawking like a bird or something. There's some specific codes we'll talk about in a minute. For example, this person is squawking VFR is what they're doing. Now, what about the G1000, the glass panel type stuff we have? Let's take a look at what their transponder looks like. It's really kind of hidden in a menu there. Let's see if we can find one. All right. So this is good. It's down here in the corner of the PFD. It says right here, transponder 1200, and it's on. If you push this soft key here, it will, let's see if I can find that picture again. That was a good picture right here. If you push this transponder button, you can type in a code if you need to. So you hit transponder, and then you can dial in codes and things like that. So it works the same way. It's just kind of in a different spot there. Okay. So let's talk about 3 different kinds of transponders. First thing we have is mode A. Mode A transmits a 4-digit code. That's all it does. It does not give any altitude information. Altitude information is given by a mode C transponder. And there's certain places mode C transponders are required. For example, anywhere above 10,000 feet MSL, unless you're within 2,500 feet AGL. So if you're flying over a mountain that's 11,000 feet tall and you're only 1,000 feet above that, you're technically at 12,000 feet MSL, but you're within 1,000 feet of the ground. So you wouldn't need it in that little spot. But anytime else you're above 10,000 MSL and you're not below 2,500 feet AGL, you need to have a mode C transponder. You also need to have it anytime you are within 30 nautical miles of Class B airspace. I'm going to show you this on a chart here. So a lot of people see this magenta line and they think, oh, Class C airspace, but it's not. So you can kind of see it here. There's this magenta circle. Here's the Class B airport over here. But if I zoom in, you see this magenta line. See where it says 30 nautical miles there on the screen? It means that that's where the mode C, we call it the mode C veil. So you have to have a mode C transponder if you're operating within there. Now, you don't have to be talking to approach control. You can have it just a standard generic 1200 squawk code in there, not talking to anybody, but if you're inside there, so if you're flying around the Jordanelle, you need to have that mode C transponder, and it goes 30 miles out from any Class B airport, there. So, come on. When you're within and above Class C airspace, so if you're overflying Class C, you need it. And when you're within the ADIZ, and we talked about ADIZ a little bit when we talked about airspace. It's the Air Defense Identification Zone. That's when you get near the border of the U.S., you need to have a transponder when you're within that ADIZ little area there. Mode S. Mode S are kind of a fancy mode C, but it also, you can have something in your plane called a TCAS, which stands for Traffic Collision and Avoidance System, or TIS, which is a traffic information system. And so now you've got a fancy transponder that's talking to other planes. And so TCAS will give you, the difference between TIS and TCAS, quite honestly, is that TCAS, I believe, if I remember this right from airline days, TCAS will give you conflict resolution, they called it. So it's saying 2 planes are coming, and it'll say traffic, and it's a little screen, and it'll have a little target on it. And then as you get closer to it, it'll say traffic again, and then it'll say pull up or climb, and it'll tell you climb 1,000 feet to get above it. So it'll give you resolution. It'll tell you what to do about this traffic if they don't change or you don't change or whatever. So you need a Mode S transponder to do something with that. All right, here's some specific codes. These are codes you need to memorize. Number 1, 1200. So anytime you're told to squawk VFR, that means put in 1200 into your transponder code. It's very standard, so that means you got a bunch of planes out there right now probably squawking 1200 VFR. The next one is hijacking. So if you're being hijacked, you need to squawk 7500. Hopefully the hijackers don't know that, and they won't see you sneak in 7500 in there. And then if that's the case, ATC will see that blow up and say, oh, okay, yeah, we got a hijacking here. And they'll start moving planes away from you, and they'll start to realize that we've got a problem here. Somebody is not in control of their aircraft right now. We have a hijacking situation. 7600, I always remember 76 radio fix, because that's when you're having a radio issue. So maybe your transponder's working, your radio's broken, you might need those light gun signals or whatever. And so you're going to squawk 7600, and immediately ATC is going to say, oh, this person's having a radio problem. We will stop trying to call them now, and we'll start moving traffic out of their way. Now we can talk more about that in class, but that's really is helpful to ATC if you can do that. And then 7700, that's 77. We say going to heaven, which means I've got an emergency. I may not make it. But anytime you have any kind of emergency, even if it's not like life-threatening, if you have an emergency, you should definitely squawk 7700, and that'll tell ATC, hey, let's get all the air traffic out of these people's way and things like that. We may have watched a video in class where we saw like someone get kind of tangled up in a traffic pattern with a bunch of other planes, and then they wound up crashing. Some classes I show that video to. That would have been a good time for that pilot to reach over and squawk 7700 and be like, I'm declaring an emergency. Like, let me land now. I'm low on fuel, or whatever the reason is for the emergency. Even if you just feel like you can't safely operate the plane, that's an emergency. Squawk 7700. Plane's on fire, 7700. Lost an engine, 7700. Medical emergency, 7700 if you need it. Okay. And the last one is 7777, and that one is military intercept. So if you're being intercepted by military aircraft, you drifted into that restricted zone, you flew too close to the White House, whatever it is, and you've got fighter jets on either side of you, and they're showing you that, you know, they're rocking their wings and they're pulling in front of you, rocking the wings. That means that you're being intercepted at that point. Maybe your radio is broken. Maybe that's why you're being intercepted. Maybe they're trying to get hold of you. Well, that's when you dial in 7777, and they say, okay, he knows he's being intercepted now. We can relax a little bit and try to get this person escorted out of here and deal with them however we need to. ADS-B stands for Air Data Surveillance Level B, and we'll watch a video on that. But essentially what ADS-B is, kind of revolutionary. It was not really around in my early days of flight instructing, but now it's in every plane, and you can actually get that TIS, that traffic information system, inside your plane. You can have a little screen. And there's two kinds. There's ADS-B in and ADS-B out. And ADS-B in means you can just receive signals from other planes. ADS-B out means you're transmitting signals to other planes. So you can have an ADS-B out and not an in. Maybe you don't want to pay for the screen or whatever it is. So some people just have the out. The out is required within, you know, near Class B airspace and things like that. But we'll learn about that in class and learn what it actually is. All right, let's talk about emergency. So now we're going back to communications a little bit. We're sort of mingling ATC now a little bit with radio phraseology and things like that. So what should I do? I'm in an emergency. I should squawk 7700. That's one thing I should do. And here's some things I should do on the radio. I should also, if you're in contact with ATC, you should. If you're not in contact with ATC, broadcast on 21.5. We call that GUARD, G-U-A-R-D. And lots of pilots are monitoring GUARD. At the airlines, we always kept it in. I think we had COM3 on the jet and the Brasilia, and we used to dial in 21.5. And we just keep it on all the time, and we just were listening. And if we ever heard, sometimes we haven't talked about ELTs much in class, but an ELT goes off, you can hear that on 21.5. You can also you can say Mayday, Mayday, Mayday. And declare your emergency or whatever it is. And then airlines are flying up high. They probably will hear you and be able to help you. They might be able to relay your signal to the nearest center. In fact, they probably will. They'll probably say, hey, let's say I'm flying near Denver and I'm on Denver Center and I'm flying my airliner and I hear on 21.5, Mayday, 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 I've lost my engine. I'm landing near this town. I might say, hey, Denver Center, I just got something on GUARD or on 21.5. I got a Mayday call. This is what I know. And then they can start to scramble emergency vehicles and stuff like that for you. So 21.5, keep that in your back pocket. If you have an extra comm, maybe keep it dialed in there while you're flying cross country and stuff like that. You just don't want to waste time trying to remember that. And you should always talk about the urgency. Consists of either mayday, mayday, mayday if you're in distress, or you can say if it's just urgent, pan, 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 pan. I haven't heard that one too much, but it is a thing. And you want to give as much time information as possible, time allowing. Now, if you're 500 feet off the ground, lost your engine, don't worry about the radio calls. Just land the plane, land the plane. But if you're at 12,000 AGL and lost your engine, you're going to be floating down for probably 15, 20 minutes. You could give some information like my location. I am 5 miles west of this airfield, or I'm, at 5,000 MSL. I've lost my engine, or I'm on fire. I have 5 people on board, and I'm going to try to make a landing at this spot. Please send help, or whatever you want to say. Just give as much information as you can. You'll be shocked at the little grain of information that helps save lives or helps expedite help getting to you. So definitely give location, altitude, condition, and souls on board if you can. Those are things that I would always give no matter what. And remember, always fly the aircraft first. Some people get so wrapped up in trying to say the right thing on the radio, they forget to fly the plane and they stall it. They run into a mountain or whatever, and it ends tragically. All right, this is a long one. So fill in the stuff in bold, but this is LHASO. LHASO is land and hold short operations. LHASO is land and hold short operations. And we're going to talk about it in class, but basically what happens, you have maybe intersecting runways, and they want you to land on one, but stop before you get to the other because somebody's landing on the other one. Some things you should know about that, typically, I'm going to put it up here on screen so you can fill in your notes, is that you can find out the available landing distance in the chart supplement. Student pilot certificate holders, so you haven't got your pilot's license yet, you're flying on a student pilot certificate, you should always reject it. You're actually not allowed to participate in the LHASO programs. You can always refuse one. If you get one and you're like, man, this sounds really scary, I don't think I can do this, there's some reason, just refuse it. But if you can do it, do it. If it's an airport you're super familiar with, you're great at your at handling your aircraft, the conditions are good, and you have plenty of distance to land that plane and stop, land and hold short of some spot, then go ahead and accept it if you think it's a good idea. I try to practice LHASO sometimes. I always give myself a spot to stop at on the runway, and that way I'm constantly trying to brush up my skills a little bit and keep that fresh in my mind with it. Now, there is some laws. You should only receive a LHASO clearance when there's a minimum ceiling of 1,000 feet and the visibility is at least 3 miles. Okay. And the reason why they want to have basic VFR weather conditions is to allow you to make visual contact with other aircraft that are on the ground at the same time. Alrighty. I know there's a lot of notes. I appreciate you sticking with me. Definitely going to have some fun with this in class. We're going to practice some radios and things like that. And I think you're going to learn a lot really quickly. But you got to just memorize who all these people are and what services are available and things like that.